Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Scale Up panels, about scaling companies for economic impact. In this day and age, everywhere in the world, Scale Up has become the focus of government policy, maybe the number one focus, as we all realized that the scale-ups, those tech companies that grow, much faster than the other ones, the top 10% fastest growing companies create about 80% of the economic impact. So when we understand that and we see our policies, our working to create more innovation, more supply innovation, earlier stage companies that start growing to the commercialization stage, but then die at a very high rate, then we start becoming concerned and start seeing that we actually need to reserve resources and the best minds and learn from each other on how can we help those scale-ups actually go through the commercialization stage, achieve growth and scale so that we can create that impact for our societies and job creation, exports, foreign direct investment, all of the stuff that we all work for so that our societies thrive. So I have here today amazing panelists. I have Lucy Chalburn, who's a leader at the Cleantech Group based in Italy. I have Mike Jackson, who's a deal maker at the UK Department for Business and Trade in Bristol, but also leading a hyper-growth program in Canada. And I have Gopi Ganesalingam, who's Senior Director at MDEC, who's also leading scale-up programs in Malaysia. So thank you for coming, and let's just get started. It's like the first question always when we think about policies is, what is the problem statement? What are we trying to do? What are the objectives of us governments and of our agencies and accelerators in creating scale-ups? Gopi, you want to start?
Sure. So my name is Gopi Ganesalingam. I'm from Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation, MDEC, a government agency, and we are tasked to drive and champion the digital economy. So our digital economy is not small. It's 23% of the GDP, and it's growing. So to answer your question, so because the digital economy is so important, there are different focus areas, but one of the main focus areas is about globalizing our companies, right? And why do we want to globalize? One, the digital economy brings down all the borders. As we globalize our companies, we create capacity for these companies, and in return, these companies will then not only expand, but they will also have lots of job creation, which is what we want, high-end job creation. As we expand, these companies would have a lot of innovation as they go into different markets. There is a talent pool that they play with, that they hire, they bring back. There's lots of innovation that takes place as we go global. So the MDEC's proposition for the digital economy is that we build products, we build companies not for the local market, but for the global markets. And so for us and the team that I lead here in MDEC is to open up all these markets for our companies to come and operate for bilateral trade.
Thank you. Mike?
Sorry. Hi, everyone. So previous to doing my current role within government, I ran all the UK government's programs for scale-ups. And the word scale-up was a really important kind of step for the UK government, because up to that point, and this is about 2015, everything had been about startups. And countries and the media and ministers are obsessed about startups. They always talk about startups. And my job was to stop them talking about startups, because we'd got to a point in the UK by the middle of the decade where the startup ecosystem was brilliant everywhere in the UK. If you were a startup coming from a university, or you were coming out of a later career, as we heard in previous sessions, you would get support. There would be local support. But if you were a scale-up, you were left alone, and there was no focus on you. And yet those are the companies, as JF has just mentioned, that actually created the jobs. Those were the companies that became international and started paying taxes, which is very important to government. So I was asked to set up a whole series of programs to support those companies and to find those companies and really to give more focus on that. And I spent a lot of time auto-correcting scripts for ministers to remove the word startup and put scale-up in. And also define how you spell scale-up, which isn't without a hyphen. It's one word, just like startup is. So that was really the problem, was shifting the focus of government and support from startups, because that job had been done, onto scale-ups. And we've heard other ecosystems, there's great work being done here in the state of Victoria, where there's still a big focus on startups. Get that right first. That is very important. You can't ignore startups. But once it's running, it tends to run itself. And you don't need to focus on it. So the problem statement is shift the focus when it's the right time to shift it onto the companies that will give economic impact.
What is the problem statement for clean tech?
So for clean tech, hello everyone, great to be here. Clean Tech Group, we look at clean tech ecosystems globally and how those can work to really accelerate the growth of clean tech startups. And that's got a double importance in the clean tech space, because I think Startup Genome's work shows that clean tech is one of the fastest growing sectors. So there's great potential for economic impact here, but we also need those startups to scale for climate impact, because it's only when they reach a certain size that we're going to get those material climate benefits that are going to save us from this kind of situation that we're in at the moment. But clean tech startups and clean tech scale-ups have specific needs, because it's not like software where you can push a button and go global. Clean tech scaling up, it's about building factories, building hydrogen production facilities, and then it's about how do you get that product to your customer. So that has its whole new set of requirements. So how are you going to finance those production facilities? Since we have the UK here, I'll talk about some work we've done in the UK where we mapped out the UK's public support for clean tech, and there's a very comprehensive support of between certain levels of development. But at the point where scale-ups get to the point where they need to take this step to commercialization, find their customers, build their production facilities, the support stops and there's a big gap, and that's mirrored in the private investment. So that's something we need to solve for clean tech.
Yeah, and it's a good transition to my next question, which is what are the scaling challenges? Maybe Mike, you can start on that.
Yeah, so a lot of scaling challenges are about globalization. It's about becoming an international company. If you're lucky enough to be in a home market like the UK, 70 million people, an affluent country, you can build a really big business. And I've seen businesses, grow in Gulf states, in lots of regions, obviously in the US. You don't really need to go international. But if you want to become a global category leader, and if you want to get the big investment, you're going to have to go global. And that is a problem for a lot of countries, because in a lot of ecosystems, in that they don't really know how to do that. They don't have the networks. They've never done it themselves, and they make mistakes. And even for the UK, where you'd think, the US is a relatively easy place to go to. We all travel there on holiday. We speak the same language, American. But when you actually go to America, you discover it's a very competitive place. It's a very different place. It's got different laws, different requirements. So I coined a phrase which we used in government of saying that the US was the graveyard of ambition for UK tech companies. And there's actually vanishingly small numbers that have really made it big in the US. So if you think it's hard for the UK, where we share so much culture, so much language, so many laws, imagine how hard it is if you're in another ecosystem, if you're in Malaysia or if you're in a Gulf state or anywhere else. It's even harder. So focusing on that is something that has become a bit of a passion, how to help companies make the most of their opportunities in the world's largest tech market, which is the US, but in other markets as well. The Asia-Pacific markets, Indonesia and others are growing massively, and those are really interesting markets. But again, they have all kinds of cultural challenges.
And so tell me, Gopi, what are the key challenges for the Malaysian companies wanting to go to Europe and the US?
Sure. Firstly, I want to just ride on what Ian said. We do scale-ups because handling scale-ups very different from startups. So startups we don't. Also on Ian's topic is about being global. Mike's, I don't want to say Mike. Mike's thing it's about going global. And so it's about going global from day one. Now, I don't consider any company global. Personally, I don't consider any company global if you're not operating in Asia. Because you cannot be a global company sitting in the US and operating the American market. You cannot be a global company sitting in the UK operating the European market. You're not global. But if you need to include Asia, and now this is where the complexity comes in. So the complexity is, in the US, you have 50 states, one government, mainly one regulatory framework, and you're done. But when you come into Asia, you have 20 over countries with 20 different governments, with 20 different cultures, 20 different languages, and you try and navigate here, and that's where the challenge comes in. And yet, I think back in Malaysia, we have very good entrepreneurship, and these entrepreneurs have navigated Asia. They've taken a dominant position in Asia, and now the roles are reversed. How do we take these companies into the Australian market, into the European market, into the US market, and then get them to be global players? Because you're not global if you don't go beyond Asia as well. And that is where MDAC's focusing on and saying, digital exports, open the markets, let our companies do bilateral trade outside Asia. And that's my role. So that's the challenge I have. So the challenge.
What's the challenge for the companies themselves when you tell them, yeah, let's go to the US? What do they face? So
the challenge is two-pronged challenge. They're all entrepreneurs, so they're daring. The challenge is we come from an economy where the currency is a lot lower than the US currency or the European currency. So you've got to spend 3 to 4 times more to get into for your spend. That's number one. The second challenge, and I think it's a cultural challenge, is storytelling. The Asians generally do not. We're not very good in storytelling, and that is something that MDAC has intervened. We are working with our companies on storytelling. I mean, it's hard work, but it's the way you tell your story, your elevator pitch, your long pitch, your short pitch, and that has helped us change the game in the international waters. Yeah.
What about the challenge of business networks and like penetrating the US business network, the European business network, or the Asian business network? How big of a challenge is it for a company that has 5, 10, 20 million in revenues, but a very local, national, or regional business network and saying, okay, now I'm going to the US. What does that mean? What is the problem here?
Can I take the question first, then I'll pass the mic?
Go ahead.
So I think that's an excellent question, and that is where a government agency steps in. Because if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm trying to get into the US market or the Australian market, we are here today, we have brought companies in, for the kind of meetings that we have set up for these companies, with government agencies, with ecosystem players, with hubs, with companies, with buyers, there's no way a company would have had all these series of meetings set up in these 3 days. So that is where the government steps in and say, look, we're using our G2G platform, we're using our influence, we're using our network, we're opening up these. Come, get it done. So what you would have typically taken a year to do, we're allowing you to do it in 3 days. Now, you're an entrepreneur. We cannot help you sell, but when you're connected the dots, you've met the network and to help you sell. So those are some of the challenges that we take away from the entrepreneurs.
What about clean tech? How's the challenges different and when you go global?
I mean, certainly for clean tech, the international networks are also really important. We hear from clean tech entrepreneurs, even when there aren't established government programs, they're already tapping into informal international networks to go global from day one, and that's really important for them. But I think the other thing for clean tech as they expand is that the corporates have a really important role to play here, because clean tech companies, corporates have first of all, the resources They also have the operational expertise to really scale those products and services, scale the operations. They have the international market customer networks that the scaleups, they can help the scaleups get access to. So this is these kind of partnerships between corporates and scaleups are really important. The other thing corporates can do is adopt solutions or send demand signals. So I think Maersk launched on last Friday their first methanol ship, green methanol ship. They've put in an order now for 19 more ships that can run on green methanol. That is a huge demand signal to anyone who's producing methanol. And I think Melbourne, there's one of the largest current green methanol projects in the world in development partly because of this commitment Maersk has made to converting their ships to a greener shipping fuel. So these kind of initiatives are also really important.
And I understand in clean tech, it's so broad, right? It cuts across 5-6 sectors of the economy.
Exactly.
And then the corporate market is very fragmented itself, right? Where you go into agriculture or in shipping or everything. Every country has its dominant players, and that makes it probably more difficult.
Exactly. This is very difficult for startups and scale-ups to identify the exact corporate that they need to work with. So that's something where support organizations can help scale-ups to identify the right partners. Yeah.
Who can help them? Those scaling companies in clean tech. Does the clean tech group helps and another organization like yours?
We do. A clean tech group. We're in a number of programs helping corporates who've made this commitment to sustainability to work with, identify. First of all, they identify their unmet needs within the business, so sustainability challenges they're facing. And then we go out and help them to find companies. We look globally, we track clean tech companies globally, so help them to find companies to work with, to trial those solutions in the real world and then scale them out across the business so that they can get the sustainability impact.
Thank you. Let's go to the programs and get some insights from you guys who've been leading really scale-up programs in very different geographies. Gopi, you want to start telling us what are these key ideas, things that you imagine and worked well? Maybe also those that failed, that seemed obvious and it's not working, is very challenging so that others can learn.
So one of the things that we found, the problem statement when I joined MDAC, by the way, I'm from the industry, so I'm an entrepreneur myself, MDAC's my client, so when they asked me to come and help out, the problem statement was, how do you identify companies that are ready to scale? And then what is it that the companies need to scale? So we looked at it and we realized, first of all, we had really good entrepreneurs, we had really good products, but we were not telling our stories. And then if we get the storytelling right, we get the branding right, many of us take marketing and branding poorly. I mean, I think we need to invest in marketing and branding. It's so important. As you build an ecosystem out, as you build these companies, I think that is where the fundamental flaw is we don't spend enough on marketing branding. But once you get that right, we realize that the storytelling is done, and when the government intervenes and opens networks in different markets, companies are getting in. So we came up with a program called GAIN, which is a scale-up acceleration, global acceleration program, where we emphasize on international markets. G is for gateway, A is for amplification. We amplify these companies, these entrepreneurs, these successors. And then as they build their companies, they need money. So the I is for investor. We have investor relations. We're connected to all the investors globally, and then we match. And then N is for nurture, because we all know every entrepreneur, every leader needs a mentor. So we also match them with international mentors that are far ahead of the game, and so that's what GAIN's all about. It's now a federal program that MDAC runs. But the challenges were, I think, we tried to bite more than we could chew. As we started scaling these companies, we thought we were ready to go into the US market. Boy, were we wrong. It was different. So we went there 3 times. We really couldn't get into the US market. We couldn't get into the UK market. And that's why I'm going to have a discussion with him after this, and to see how can we connect to the Canadian market, to the UK market, because very different markets. So we made mistakes there. So the mistakes that these companies from the US and from the UK also make in Asia is they assume that all of Asia is one country. That's the biggest mistake you will make. So we all make mistakes. So my sharing is, I think we need to build capacity first in home base in Asia before you get on to international waters beyond Asia. And for companies that are coming in from the UK, from the European market, from the US markets, Asia is not one country. It's 21 countries with 21 frameworks. So that's a lesson I can share. That's
very insightful. So you mean when you say we have a program to help you go global, it's usually not true. It's going to be like, what 1, 2, or 3 countries can we help you go into because we know those markets, we have networks.
Yeah. I will go back to what Confucius said. Journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. We'll take those first steps, baby steps first, but ultimately we'll be there.
Mike, tell us about your 2 experience, right? One in the UK with TechNation, but also the hypergrowth program in Canada.
Yeah, and I think when you look at kind of maturing ecosystems that have got a number of companies coming through at scale, you start to think, is it the scaling stage that's the important thing? And we had a couple of different programs, one for growth stage companies that have typically raised a Series B round, and one for Series A companies that had just raised their round and were growing. And those 2 programs were really good and went through probably 20 or 30 companies a year for a number of years, for 10 years in total, actually. But then we started to segment into both sectors and technologies. So we developed a fintech program for fintechs, because they had unique challenges, they had regulatory challenges, they needed to talk to different kinds of customers. Similarly, a cyber program. Cyber's a big thing in the UK. We wanted to really hook into the US market, but just take cyber companies to the US. And then AI. And AI is not really a sector, it's a technology, but explaining that there's real AI and there's kind of everyone else pretending to do AI. So how do you segment that? And then finally, we set up a net zero program, which coincided with the UK hosting the COP event in 2020. And that was a very important program because we were, again, pulling all kinds of different companies that were saying we're covering net zero, but actually which ones were really doing proper work in the net zero space. So those were kind of my programs. We ran about 7 programs a year, covered about 200 companies. And that felt pretty good in that we were supporting some really good scaling companies. What was interesting is for government, that wasn't enough. They wanted us to do 2,000 companies. They'd come to me and say, Mike, we want you to do 2,000. And I'd say, there aren't 2,000 scale-ups in the UK. And they said, there must be. We've got thousands of startups. But actually, finding real scale-ups who are at the scale inflection point, they've got the capital they need to really scale, to go global, that's quite a rare beast, even in a very mature ecosystem, perhaps the number 3 ecosystem in the world in the UK. And then now I'm kind of have this joy of spreading some of the experience that we went through in the UK, the good and the bad. We made some mistakes, as everyone does, as you go through these journeys. Now I'm working with Startup Genome, actually, and looking at overseas ecosystems. And the first program is in Quebec in Canada. And that, for me, was a revelation because, again, I had a vision of Canada, a bit like you were talking about the vision of Asia, as being one country, but you would get there and you realize that the provinces are very different. And particularly in Quebec, a province of about 8.5 million people, where exporting is exporting to Toronto. And that was a whole new concept for me. But also, those companies, because that home market is relatively small, have to export, frankly, too early. They try and go to America when they're not really ready. They haven't really even got necessarily product market fit in their home market. So the program that we've devised is really helping the very best of those companies, and that's probably only 10 companies a year, 15 at most, to take advantage of the opportunities in their nearest kind of growth market, which is obviously the US for them, but it's also Europe for some, particularly, the French-speaking elements. And just working out exactly what they need to do and almost stopping them going global, allowing them to pause and connect to people who will give them some tough love, will say, you're not ready. You haven't got a real plan yet. You haven't really got your product market fit. You haven't got the right capital to do this. And if you go too early, you'll fail, just as you were saying. And that's a real challenge. And particularly if you look at the clean tech market, where typically you need either very strong corporate partners or you need a lot of money. So, we were seeing very early stage clean tech companies raising 100 million and not really having much of a clue what to do with that money. I think that's now happening in the AI market where, companies have been given ludicrous amounts of money with, they've only been incorporated for 6 months and they've got no real clue what to do with the money. So that is as much of a challenge, saying no to companies as to helping them and saying yes.
So as you were talking about segmenting those scale-up companies, so do you mean that you cannot help every company in one program go together to the US across all sectors at the same time?
Yeah, so this is a slightly controversial point. I am not a fan of trade missions. I think it's basically innovation tourism. And the UK love them. So the Prime Minister will pack a plane, go to India with 50 companies, have lots of photo opportunities. It's great. Everyone goes out for nice meals. No one comes back with any business. So I'm a believer in point to point. That company wants to be introduced to that customer or that potential partner, and that's what you do.
It's bespoke.
It's bespoke. And it's hard to do it bespoke. And it's not sexy, and it doesn't involve aeroplanes and pictures for prime ministers. But it's what actually achieves results, I believe.
Okay, we wanted to talk about the regulatory framework that is required for these companies to thrive. And maybe we'll start with clean tech, because that's a big, complicated one. Because as these companies grow, they hit and they get stopped by regulatory frameworks that were made over 50 years, 100 years, dominated by large corporations that help the governments define them and becomes barriers to entry for these scale-ups. And the scale-ups voice, of course, has to rise and really get to the table with the government about how do we change this, how do we change that, how is it working for clean tech, what's the challenge there, and what are the solutions?
Yeah, and I think clean tech is possibly one of the only sectors where you'll find innovators begging for regulation. But yes, as JF said, that's a typical problem in clean tech, because the regulation was made for the incumbent solutions that were designed 50 years ago. So you get regulations, for example, that define that cement has to have a certain percentage of clinker, and clinker is the part that is responsible for the most of the emissions in cement making. So alternative cements that don't have clinker in them have a much lower carbon footprint, but a lot of regulatory frameworks won't accept them. So getting those things changed is a challenge. The other thing that regulation can do is proactively create markets. So, for example, in Czechia, at a certain point, new gas boiler installations were banned. That had a huge impact on the heat pump market. It exploded the market, basically. So there's a role for this regulation to actually proactively create demand as well in clean tech.
Gopi, any examples from Malaysia with your companies with GAIN?
Yeah, so, I think this is a global problem. Regulatory framework changes because technology is moving so fast. We're driving innovation, and guess what? Governments are all now grappling with trying to change regulatory frameworks. We sit on a 50-year-old regulatory framework if we're lucky. Usually it's almost 100 years old. And so in Malaysia, we focus into two now. We are into the fintech regulatory framework changes, where we are working with our central bank, and we throw our companies in there, go innovate, bring the challenges out, and we are beginning to write frameworks around, or regulatory frameworks around crypto, around fintech, around lending. So that's happening. The other one that we are looking at, COVID taught us a great lesson, all the gaps in our public health services, is on the health tech side. We're doing the same, where we want to have a regulatory framework that is addressing health tech problems. And we want to do it super fast. We need to have a fast track mechanism because in Malaysia at least, some of these regulatory frameworks have to go through a long period. They have to go through the AG's chambers, then into Parliament by the time it's introduced. So the gestation period is very, very long. By the time it comes out, the technology has changed. So that is something that we're all grappling with, but it has to be done. So these are the two focus areas we have for right now. It's fintech, health tech, and cybersecurity has taken a life of its own. Everyone now knows that security is a big concern. So it's going to be mandatory soon that all our data is protected by a certified cybersecurity solution or a provider.
So as you're going through these different processes of changing and adapting laws for different sectors, are you building a playbook? Are you building a team, a task force inside your government or your agency to be able to learn and then apply the framework again the next time?
Sure. So I think playbook's a bit tough because it's moving, it's dynamic. But what we're doing is we're having task force within our own ministries, our agencies. We're having task force to monitor.
Just for regulatory changes.
That's right. Wow. So MDAC's now moved into regulatory changes as well because we are initiating innovation. We want our companies to be fast, but they're being held back by regulatory frameworks. So we're getting involved in regulatory framework changes to help government understand some of the challenges that we have, and how do we then put Malaysia or put Asia in the front seat.
I know the technician, Mike, was very involved in codifying a lot of the regulatory framework that the UK government and the City of London has implemented. And that's really usually for startups and therefore for scale-ups. But then as your company scaled in the scale-up program, how did that work in terms of bumping against these regulations, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, and it was I think it was really a showcase, particularly started with fintech. So, we wanted in the UK to really adopt a lot of the technologies really early, almost at the, breaking things stage, but with people's money, that's tricky. So the Financial Conduct Authority, which is a government body that regulates the kind of financial services market, set up a sandbox, and Technation, as the people that was kind of representing the fintech companies, set up a fintech panel in joint association. So the companies had a voice. They could meet with people that they would probably never get a meeting with in reality, and talk with one voice and say, we need to have this type of regulation. And then the fintech panel had, the great and the good, who could say, right, this is the kind of stuff we could do. And what it allowed us to do was to go from basically having 5 old banks that had run, forever since the beginning of banking, to suddenly having 20 challenger banks. And some of them didn't survive. Some of them didn't offer a full service, but they, the ones that have survived now have as many customers as those banks that have been going for 200 years. And a lot of us, because I was kind of sampling these, at one stage I had 11 different bank accounts in 11 different challenger banks, which was great fun. Yeah, exactly. But it was a great model, and it's allowed in the UK for us to get quite a way ahead of other countries. Now, in the US, that was something that wasn't allowed for a long time. So the banks had a real stranglehold. It was, almost anti-competitive in what was happening in the US. Now they're allowing some challenger banks to come through. But they still have a very tight regulatory framework because they're more worried about failure. And then we copied the fintech panel and created a law tech panel, because law tech and the legal system wanted to really adopt a lot of new technologies. And again, that's a highly regulated area. And that law tech panel allowed the legal tech companies that we were dealing with at Technation to have a voice to government and to some of the regulatory bodies. And that's worked very well. And now, as some of you may have seen, we're keen to take a lead in AI regulation, and we're looking at setting up a similar system for AI companies to be able to talk to government with one voice.
Do you see these happening in other countries as well?
The fintech panel was copied by quite a number of countries, Singapore being one of the leading ones. They came over, wrote it all down and went back and did it. And that, a lot of the success of the kind of Singapore being a host for so many financial institutions now, I think stems from that. They adapted it and they changed it and they made it slightly better, as everyone does. I think that's one of the key messages I always say about all these programmatic supports, whether it's regulatory support or whether it's the programs to support companies. It has to change and it has to evolve. So playbooks have to be rewritten after every program, and it's boring for those people, particularly in government, who want to just rinse and repeat the same kind of things. But actually, the world moves way quicker than that. You've got to be fleet of foot. And even with our program that we're doing in Quebec, we've just presented the learnings from the first program and are changing quite dramatically the way we're going to do the second program. And government was supportive of that. They actually liked the fact we weren't just going to, crank the handle and do it again.
Looking at clean tech again, do you see these task forces or panels, regulatory panels being developed in some countries, in the European Commission and in other regions?
Yes, and again, this is something that's very relevant to clean tech because often some of the bigger incumbents have an interest in maintaining the status quo, and they also have the resources to be able to talk with policymakers and go and approach policymakers by themselves. And the smaller innovators, they're putting all their resources into growing the company. They don't have the resources to spend on that kind of thing. So we do run some policy programs. For example, Clean Tech for Europe is a program which is all about bringing the voice of clean tech innovation to EU policymakers. And we do that through a group of clean tech VCs from all over Europe, and they bring the voice of their they bring the obstacles that their portfolio companies are seeing on the ground. So I think there's something like 22 VCs in the group, but between them they represent more than 400 clean tech startups and scale-ups across the EU, and they can aggregate those obstacles and barriers and bring them to the EU policymakers, and that's seen some results. And we also have a similar program in the UK and now in Spain and Portugal. There's one in the Baltics, one in the Nordics. So they're really working to help accelerate the clean tech growth across the EU and the UK, which is no longer in the EU. Hadn't you noticed?
I was going to maybe pass it on to the audience for questions, but anything else you want to say before I do that? Any key points that you think we've missed?
No, I think we touched on everything, and I'm glad we have similar problems. And I also believe that it cannot be a boilerplate model. Just like what you said, it has to be bespoke, and that's exactly why it's working now and not earlier.
Yeah, just a quick point on economic impact. How do you measure economic impact? So my government programs cost about £6 million a year, which is a drop in the ocean for a government funded, but it has to show an ROI. And I'm a great believer that the key metric is job creation and high value job creation. So in economies that are at full employment, which the UK is at the moment, it's not about creating new jobs, it's about creating high value jobs. So the evaluation report, which was independent, which I had to submit my kind of findings to, was looking at how many jobs did the companies that went on our programs create compared to companies that didn't get the support from government. And taking out new concepts for me are called selection bias, where you select the best companies, and guess what? They do better than the others because they're the best companies. But taking that out, what is the actual ROI? What can you say? They created this many extra jobs. That has a value. Those people pay taxes. Companies that we deal with very rarely are paying taxes. They're actually claiming benefits. They're claiming R&D tax credits and other things. But the employees, high-value employees, they pay a lot of tax. In the UK, typically you're paying 50% of your salary in tax. So if you can measure that, which is quite easy, and if you can track it back to when those companies started on a program, with a bit of hindsight, we start that evaluation after 2 years, you could get some good figures. And we eventually got to a figure that we were all happy with of about 6 times return on the money that had been invested. But that was in, the value of those high-value jobs.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When we started in Quebec selling this program to the government, that was, just before COVID and during COVID. But since then, Quebec has had full employment for a year, 2 years. So as I met last summer with the deputy minister, he's like, it's not about jobs, It's not about jobs. It's about good paying jobs. It's about increasing productivity of our country, of our region, because and it's going to have to be through innovation. So scaling innovation is extremely important. But also from the beginning of the program, their vision was that this is a great way to export, and that became a big measure because they had a goal to increase exports for Quebec by $10 billion within 5 years. And we said, I think we can deliver maybe 20%, 10% of that goal with the scale-up program. Very ambitious for us to say that, but that's one of the reasons also they wanted it, because scale-ups, technology companies, when they scale, 80% of their revenues, 90% of their revenues, 95% if you're in a small country will be exports. And that's really a great metric to track. So we're tracking that as well. So I'm going to turn it to questions from the audience. And you want to start?
Yes, I'm interested in what makes a transition from a startup to a scale-up. So is it, for example, you've gone from Series B or to IPO, or is it you've de-risked in a certain way, or have you got moved from, say, equity funding to debt funding? I mean, you mentioned jobs, but most of the high-tech startups are labour substitution for productivity, so the number of jobs is not necessarily a good metric these days for a high-tech moving into scale-up. It's probably less jobs. So I'm just curious, what marks that transition point in your mind, the way you're trying to position and refocus?
I'll give the technical answer, and then he's going to give the practical answer. So, starting in 2011, where we did our big research into Startup Genome Success Factor report, and now that you're going to see this in the scale-up report that just launched last night or this morning, so you can go to startupgenome.com, download it, and you'll see what do we call scale-ups, why do we call it scale-ups. So working with Steve Blank, and with this customer development methodology and all the data from 50,000 startups worldwide, we defined the discovery stage. Everybody knows that's a startup genome stage, validation stage. What we usually don't see used much is the efficiency stage and then the scale stage. So what are you doing in the efficiency stage is you're trying to reach product market fit. And what does that mean? You have a well-defined offering and you know which market you're going after, so you're efficient. Because if you don't know what's market segment you're going after, you're wasting a lot of money in marketing and you're never going to be able to scale profitably. So product market fit is that. And then defining your unit economics. That means what's my cost of acquisition of customers, my CAC? What's my long-term value of customers? So that means you need to have an idea of your churn. That takes time, a year and a half. Is my churn low enough so that my LTV is higher than my CAC, right? So, and then you have that, then you have, okay, do I have a sales model that is actually scalable and repeatable? That means if I have direct sales, I've hired at least one salesperson. That person is not special, right? They're not an industry expert, because I know I'm not going to be able to scale my sales force with industry experts. And I made that I hired them, trained them, I made them profitable. And then you get to a VC and you say, okay, I figured all of this out. Now I can multiply. Give me 10 million, give me 20 million, right? So now I can scale, right? And that's really the technical idea of the scale, that when the scale stage starts. And it's usually when a company has a large Series A, and that's what we're going to propose as a new definition. If a company has 50 million or more in valuation, that means a VC with their dollars give them a big Series A or a sizable Series B, because they believe that this dollar is going to go to growth, not to product market fit, unit economics, which is not that costly, right? And that's how we can then identify those ready to scale. And in practice, Mike will tell us what they've done.
what he said. No, but it's for me, it's all about firepower. So if you're a startup, money is short, you've got great ambition, but you can't do most of what you want to do. You can't hire experienced people. You just haven't got the firepower to do it. Someone comes along and either you start selling and you bootstrap your way through it and you've got sales and revenue, or some nice person gives you a lot of money. And at that point, you've then got firepower to do things, but you don't really know what those things are. You don't know how to hire the good people. You don't have the networks, as we've discussed, and you don't know, in particular, how to go international. So that, for me, is a scaling inflection point, and it's about firepower. So our programs, one of the criteria was very much, do you have the money to be able to take advantage of what we're going to tell you? It wasn't a theoretical program. We're not teaching business model canvas. We're saying, you're ready for scale, you've got the firepower, you can enact these things immediately. And if you can't, come back when you can.
Yeah, so I want to just add on amazing, fantastic, because that's how we look at Malaysia as well. It's all about ecosystems. And I learned this talking with JF the last few years. We've engaged Startup Genome. It's all about ecosystems. So we have an ecosystem that's looking at startups, innovation. That's a different ecosystem. But the moment you raise your Series A, then the scale-up ecosystem now interested in you, because once you raise money, you must be having something solid there, because that's the price you pay. So once you raise money, Series A, then it moves to the scale-up ecosystem. And it's all about ecosystems. I learned a lot of the mistakes I haven't done is because of JF, because we have spoken about some of the things that you have done globally, and he has been able to pre-warn me not to do this, not to do that. So I think that is an excellent point that you brought up in terms of the focus about job creation, because job creation high-end pays tax, so we get our money back. Companies make money, they pay tax, we get our money back. But unfortunately, I only have £1 million to play with per year.
Next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add with what Gopi just said. Look West policy was 4 or 5 years back. It's not become a look East policy. Two reasons. One is for the capital and second is for the market. Both are available in this place now. And so the startups from the globe are looking at it. Second point to add with is that the professional needs to come onto the board of scaling it up from a government agency side, not the bureaucrats, so to say. Yeah. Because that's not the way the lens look at when you look at the definitions and programmatic approach towards scaling it up. The third point which I wanted to add with you is, all three of you, don't you think that the talent becomes a very important element of a challenge when you look at the scaling part of the economic impact? And that's where we need to find a solution from ecosystem players, maybe a global ecosystem players, to find out a talent answer for that.
Yeah, it's very important to maybe attract, but also, one part of the program in Quebec is actually that we coach and mentor the head of HR. And sometimes they don't have a head of HR, sometimes the CEO, sometimes the CFO, sometimes it's someone else, but really helping them create a funnel of talent. And it cannot be local anymore. And you can see even before COVID, which is really our research is based on that, companies that had global talent sourcing did a lot better and scale at a higher rate. Does that mean we need to go? Yeah, it's 11:55. Maybe one quick question before leaving. I know you've been raising your hand.
I wanted to ask, so I work for a New South Wales government, so we're a state government, and I wanted to ask, when you were talking about job creation, like as the key metric, and maybe it's a bit different in the UK because you don't have quite as many levels of government, but how do you, I suppose, ensure that your program is the one that has created that effect? So in Australia, sometimes companies access programs across all 3 levels of government, and the metric is the same. So how do you, I suppose, demonstrate that your program is the one that falls into
The dear attribution question.
Yeah, and it's a great question. So I'll send you the report. So an independent organisation who are very clever, econometrics economists do that work. What they did is they get into a lot of detail with each individual company, because it's a small sample base. We're often looking at only 30 companies in a program, and they would say, what programs have you been on? And when did you go on them? So they would try and take out the noise factor which was always disappointing for me because the figures just kept going down and down and down. But they
I
eventually
wish,
plateaued.
I wish Ian was here from also Ontario, because he right away told me, it's like, well, we asked the companies, like, do you think most of your accelerated growth comes from this program or not? And they'll be very frank, right? There's no benefit for them to say yes or no. The entrepreneurs are very direct, and they'll say. So what we did in Quebec, so we asked them, okay, what this part of this program, does it help? And some say, didn't help at all. And this one, yeah, this was really helpful. So that's where attribution comes. So we asked them directly, what part of your growth came from this program, right? Now you think it was supported by this program. And that's the only way I think you can do it, because from the outside and from the agency's point of view, you cannot say, yeah, we take credit for that. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you.